Hey, Gary's Gulch, welcome back. This is part 2 of the amazing conversation I had with Todd Langford, my dear friend and mentor, and the owner and founder of Truth Concepts calculator software. You can find out more at truthconcepts.com. Todd and his amazing wife, Kim Butler, who has been a giant in our industry of traditional personal financial management. So she works a lot with whole life insurance, with annuities, with products that put you in the driver's seat, in control, and that are backed by 200-year-old mutual whole life insurance companies that have never broken promises for any of their clients. They map something out for you in an illustration. Todd helps you understand the math behind why it is sound and why it has very high likelihood of continuing to perform extremely well in economic good times and bad times, because the math behind it and the actuarial science have proven itself through the Great Depression, the Great Recession, many world wars, and all of the other things, the black swans of the world, of human history, that have challenged all things financial and banking. So Kim helps clients on a daily basis like I do. She's an author, a prolific author of many amazing typically shorter books. She does have an incredibly long one called Perpetual Wealth, and it's got piggy banks on the front of it, and it is a great story told in the story perspective, like many of her books, and the story about a family going through these financial lessons and journey of their lives, often generational stories. Perpetual Wealth is an amazing one, and it has a lot of great resources inside it about how to have retreats with your family, how to teach the young ones how to safely borrow and access their family banking policies. Amazing resource. But all of our other books are much smaller, and they talk about specific issues, essentially busting lies, financial lies that you've been taught over your lifetime. So one day I'll have Kim Butler, the wonderful, amazing Kim Butler, on my podcast as well. But in the meantime, this is part 2 of my conversation with my amazing mentor, Todd Langford. Now, if you didn't listen to part 1, you'll probably figure this one out eventually in the context of things, but I'm just going to pick right up. I just cut an amazing 1-hour conversation that we couldn't find a good break to change topics. So I just cut it off in the middle, what is somewhat of a segue into a new discussion about the Colby indexes, where we started in this one. But we kick back into very quickly the concepts about why it's important to understand the math, why it's important to deliver what your client really wants, which is solving their personal challenges, helping them achieve their financial goals. And why you don't want to hit them in the face with the math, but you need the math in the background to give you the confidence as an advisor to help your clients through all of this. And so I feel like I'm talking to advisors here with these 2 podcast episodes. I'm really talking to the clients about why you want to seek out an advisor who approaches your financial situation from this. Because essentially what we tell our clients, which is in our heart and souls, at least it is in mine, is that you are the number one asset. The number one asset for your family, that your family can count on, and that will provide through your own efforts their future, their financial future, is you. You are bringing home the bacon, so to speak. You are the primary breadwinner for your family, and protecting that thing, that asset, over any other thing you have. Yes, your beautiful new car, yes, your wonderful house are important assets, and you should protect those. But they all pale in comparison to losing the asset that created all those, and can create 1,000 times those number of assets, depending on what choices you take and what your path gives you as you go through life. So we tell our clients, count on yourself, put resources in place, put liquidity there, put emergency fund, put reserves, create businesses around you and the service that you provide and that unique genius that God has endowed in you. Share that at scale through businesses and through interactions with many people. That is protecting and growing and fostering. That is what we and the Prosperity Economics Advisor Movement, what I personally, what Kim Butler, what Todd Langford all stand for. And so Todd is the guy who helps us create ways to graph and to calculate what the impact of making decision A versus decision B are. And it has been tremendously impactful to all of my clients. And the language behind it is what's really important. And so that's what you'll hear with Todd and myself here in part 2, is really the language behind what we do, why we do what we do. So check out again more at truthconcepts.com. The amazing Todd Langford and his Conscious Calculations book that will be out here this year, and we'll talk more about that once it is released. I'm getting copies, happy to send you a copy, and I know you're going to love it. And I think you're going to love this part 2. Again, if you haven't listened to part 1, go back, listen to that first. It will flow much better for you. Until next time, go make something amazing happen in Gary's Gulch. And I think you're really going to like the next couple episodes that are coming.
That we're seeking to find. I just don't think it's always absolute. It is absolute, but we don't always know all the pieces that are there. Sometimes
it's the context that we're continually uncovering.
It is not to say that truth is relative. I don't believe any of that stuff. There is absolute truth. However, I think based on our knowledge at a certain point, we learn more about what truth is. What are we going to learn from the super colliders and all that kind of stuff about things that there was no way we could know 20 years ago, right? We're continuing to evolve to get closer and closer to what the truth is. But it's not relative. What's true for you, I don't think is not necessarily true for somebody else or whatever else. That's not my...
That's a cop-out, for sure. It's clearly a cop-out. Right? That's really inconvenient for me, so that's not my truth. I know, Mom, you had an 11 o'clock curfew. And that's your truth. And my truth was it was 12. So I'm not really in trouble. That's just not going to work in the real world. And I think most people recognize that's not going to work in the real world.
But I think we can beat people up with the truth too sometimes. And that's what you were talking about. The numbers. Here's what the numbers absolutely say. Yeah, I know that's what the numbers say. So let's work from there and see if we want to violate the numbers, but understand maybe this is going to cost us a little bit more so that I can do some things that are more important lifestyle. Cool. But as long as we understand what the cost of making that decision is, then it's a decision that we can make with an education, right? Where it's not just something we're just blowing and we have no idea what it is. That was a big enlightenment for me on cars. I love a new car. That's one of my favorite things. I'd love to have a car every 2 years. Until you run the numbers out and yet, okay, even a $50,000 car, you can't even buy those anymore, hardly, but even a $50,000 car over 30 years, trading it every 2 years, that's going to take $2 or $3 million away from your retirement assets. How do you know that when you're just trading them as you're taught to do from the dealership, which would love for you to do that, right? You have that number out there in the future. You might say, you know what? I love it enough that I'm willing to sacrifice $3 million in the future. Great. Then now you've made an educated decision in that direction. It's not to say don't do that, but let's have some context as to what this is really costing us. And for me, it's quite worth that.
Yeah. And luckily, though, it is for everybody else. So the 3-year-old one that you get for 60% of the cost is helpful. So you and I love cars. We love sports cars. And I love racing cars. And so I've been looking at the Porsche depreciation curves. So, of course, we're math dudes, right? So I've learned that in the 20 to 24 year range, and Porsche 911 is at the valley of its value. So, for example, right now you could buy a 2005 Porsche 911. 5 years from now, 3 years from now, it's going to be worth more than it is now. But 3 years ago, it cost more than it does now. Everybody gets the value idea. But I like to trade cars. I like to try something new. And so I'm thinking seriously about getting a garage at a local racetrack here, Sebring Raceway, and starting to buy cars at their depreciation value. It may not just be that. It might be an Austin Martin something or other, maybe one day. But buying it, using it, having fun, and then not having it cost me anything because it goes up in value, right? So I think you can experience new to you. That doesn't have to be brand new off the showroom floor to have the highest possible depreciation. So it's just an example of once you know the math and you know what's actually driving you, is there a way to achieve it without financially affecting your family so much?
And see, I think what you said is key. And what you're talking about is you've got a strategy. It's not about the product. It's not necessarily about the car.
Oh, very good.
It's about a strategy of being able to acquire that at the most reasonable price, most efficient way of doing it to where maybe it doesn't even cost you anything. Maybe you actually make money on it. So yeah, it's that so much in the financial industry is so based on product. Everything's turned into rate of return. Oh, my rate of return is better than your rate of return, whatever it is. And if there's no strategy there, it really it doesn't matter what the rate of return is on a particular product, because the likelihood of it surviving the 70 plus years that you need it to get you through the accumulation and distribution phase, it's a long time. Things are going to shift, and we have to be prepared for that shift. have those other things in our strategy that make up for the problems or take advantage of the opportunities, right?
Yeah, so I preach to my audience here all the time about having agency, having control. At the Paradigm Life, Patrick Donahue's got his hierarchy of wealth, and this is certainly consistent with what you and Kim talk to your clients about, and that you talk to other advisors about. There's a few different things. There's a historic rate of return for a typical kind of investment, and then there's your ability to influence those things. I'm not sure exactly how that comes out in the math. It would require an advanced calculator. I'm thinking of your real estate calculator's got a lot of different boxes you can fill in. And you can start to see if I actually weigh into this and I'm a real estate professional maybe, or I'm able to just get a slightly higher return or lower expenses because of my involvement, I can start to see how this might affect it, right? So you can start to bring in your personal involvement, reducing risk, increasing control, and an actual math rate of return. Am I going down a good path there?
Yeah. So yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's a talk I'm going to give another month or so. But what we hear in the industry is this idea of risk tolerance. Like you're supposed to accept a certain amount of risk. And it's the idea that how much of your assets do you feel comfortable about losing? None, right? That's a crazy idea, but it's rampant through the industry. That is a huge part of what we need to analyze your risk tolerance. We need to find out how much you're comfortable losing so that we can pick whatever stock it is in your portfolio. And that's crazy. My preference, and we don't want risk avoidance, right? Everything to gain value, to have spice of life, has got some risk around it. That's what makes it exciting, right?
Yeah.
So what do? My choice is risk mitigation, right? Where we can take on items that might have some risk to them, but we have a way to mitigate that risk. That's a whole different scenario, and it has to do with a strategy that's going to make that happen. And you think about it, you do a lot of work with real estate, and when you look at real estate, it can look great on paper, but paper can't measure human emotion that all of a sudden shifts a market and everybody's dumping properties or whatever, or nobody wants to rent or whatever all these things are. And it's usually temporary, right? And so how do you mitigate the risk of that happening? Not eliminate it, not accept it, but let's put ourselves in a position where it's not going to hurt us and we can survive until it picks back up and continues on like it's supposed to. That's a whole different scenario. A lot of times I equate it to a roller coaster, right? Love going around the curves, feeling like we're going to get thrown out and everything else, but we have that seatbelt on.
That's right. And we don't remember very many stories of that specific theme park having killed people with the roller coaster coming off, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Very true. Yeah, a mutual friend of ours, Patrick Donahoe, that has Paradigm Life that I've worked with for years. He, a few years ago, when we were kind of coming up with the premises, what did we call them? The blanking here. Kim has a great phrase for the prosperity economics advisors and our, they're
Principles?
Principles, thank you. Gosh, I just couldn't come up with the word.
Sorry.
So he suggested a principle of certainty and a principle of uncertainty. And I'm like, seriously? Yeah. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I think you maybe had the same response.
I did. It's like, no, those are just opposites. No, they're not.
Yeah, explain that because you do a better job than I do.
Yeah, it's that spice of life. It's that idea that we need uncertainty in our life. So they're both positives if they're treated the right way. Yeah, uncertainty can be disastrous if we don't have a strategy in place to mitigate the risk around that. I like to look at it as uncertainty. When we buy uncertainty assets, we have huge opportunity if we have the capability of having some risk mitigation. If we don't, then it's gambling. You might as well just go put it on red in Vegas because you might make it. I can't say you won't. But the likelihood is pretty low if we're not in there with something to fix that. And it's interesting because Peter Diamandis, in his newsletter just a month or so ago, he talked about how important uncertainty is in people's life to cause them to move forward. So it goes back to what we were talking about initially in that horizon, giving us that ability to not be stagnant, to move forward. That's what uncertainty does in our lives. We need that challenge. We need that part of our lives to be fully rounded, but it doesn't mean we have to just take a total loss because we reached out there. Do it in a strategic.
Yeah, exactly. And it is the spice of life, like you said, that keeps us going. To me, the COVID lockdowns, the government response to COVID, not the disease, the government response to COVID was fascinating. It was horrible, but it was fascinating. Like, other than my two kids and people in their generation, my wife says all the time, she's like, our boys, Jake and Ryan, were built. They were practicing from day one of their lives to be ready for COVID lockdowns. They had the time of their lives because they just played computer games nonstop and never changed their clothes. It was perfect for their age group at the time, right? But so many people who got their identity from their job or really cared about being able to travel and experience, or just didn't like being locked in their house, they initially bought into, wow, it's super scary. We should stay in the house to be safe, but we're not going to like it. And they didn't like it. It was amazing how many people stayed sucked into it.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of people who, most of us, I would say, decided this is no way to live. I would rather take some risk than live like this because the uncertainty was gone.
Yeah.
And it was horrible.
Yeah. It was beyond just the boredom. It was, which is, that's what you want from certainty. You want that boredom piece, but so you have to have some way to offset it with the uncertainty piece. That, again, that's the life, right? It's a full circle of what happens. And that's why we need the math as a base, but we have to shift away from that. And we have to understand how it applies to the situation, what our goals are, what our horizon looks like.
Yeah. So my example of cars again, always. So on this racetrack, I want to be able to have friends come and drive the cars. But when I'm choosing which ones they are, I'm also choosing that they're not just off the line $500,000, I don't know, Ferrari or something, because that would really be expensive. And I know I would be like the driver, my friend or client or whoever they are, they would be hesitant because this brand new souped up car, right? And I would be very controlling. And that's not what I want. What I want is for people to experience and have fun. And if they make a mistake, we get scratches or we get some dust and we got to fix something, but it's not expensive. And so that's just another example of allowing the uncertainty to have fun, but putting some constraints on it, right? It is a seatbelt. I want an AC Cobra, but I'm going to go with a replica. And I'm going to go with one that has fuel injection because I hate dealing with carburetors. They're like an art form. And I want to have ABS and things like that, right? So you can do that. It'll still look and feel just as cool as the $1 million or $5 million version that's an original that I would never put on the racetrack, right? So it's just an example of figure out how to bring certainty into your life to be able to go do what you really want to do. I have a dream to start a business and become a painter, but I think I may cause the family to go bankrupt. Then set yourself up with a large emergency fund and reserves for the business. I credit you, Todd, for always pointing out, circling back to, it's not just about the math, right? So I wanted to close this gap, and I think this is a decent place to do it since I brought up business owners again. And you always say, like, how important is having positive cash flow or sustainment of cash flow for a business owner? It's like the most important thing. And I guess having desirable products is good. But like, if you're out there, especially during the business startup years, and you run out of cash flow, which is pretty likely in the startup of a company, you're done. So having the ability, having some certainty in the background for a business owner to be able to reach out there with that new product. Is the iPad, or not the iPad, the iPod, is the iPod going to work? Is anybody going to want music? Are they even going to understand that you can put a bunch of songs on this little thing? I don't know, might bankrupt us, right? But you go into it with enough certainty to make sure you get out the other side.
And it's more than just the market research. It goes back to what you're talking about. It's going back to that slush fund. That is for most business startups, it's a critical place, because when you get to that place where you're short on cash, what's a banker going to do at that point in time?
They're going to say no, or he's going to say sure for a percentage of the company. Yeah.
Maybe, but they're probably going to say, it looks like this didn't work, and now you want me to support some more money going here? It's a problem. And I think that's the other thing that we have to balance. While the math may say, take the cheapest interest you can get, sometimes paying interest to have a slush fund for a short period of time makes a lot more sense, even though it's higher than what we might be able to do somewhere else. And you see it all the time, like successful real estate investors, builders. What do? They're willing to pay 24, 25% in hard money to finish up a project because they know it's only, it may be 25%, but it's only for a few months till they get the thing sold, right? They understand the value of that slush fund, even at a higher rate. And the math might say, absolutely do not do this. It doesn't make sense to spend that kind of money. the project doesn't get done otherwise. And I think the same thing can happen in our own lives. If we're not careful and we don't secure enough what people consider to be a cost in something that we're reaching out on, we could seriously get in trouble and lose the whole thing as a result.
Yep, absolutely. I talk all the time about having liquidity and being known as somebody who is a go-to person for this, that remains in a very high cash position, right? And you get phone calls all the time when you act that way. Yet, if you do the math, it would say, no, don't have money sitting at 5% or 3% or 4%. You need to have it at work all the time. Then you're become known as a person who's fully invested and has got a list of 10 things that the money will go to when I have it. You're never going to be in a position to bail somebody out at a take percentage of the company or whatever they're offering, whatever's appropriate. Take 3 points on the loan just to have the money for a week. I've been offered those things. Again, sometimes I don't take it is because it might be good money after bad, right?
Yeah,
It might be that they are, no kidding, on fire and headed into the desert. So yeah, that has to matter. You have to be careful about that. Hey, one of my favorite phrases that I thought I got from you, but I think I learned in our last truth training was that maybe I got it somewhere else or made it up. Who knows? Now, you will talk all the time about, here's your phrase, Todd. It's about a lie is much faster to tell than truth. You have a different way of saying that, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You can tell a lie in one sentence, but it takes a whole chapter to tell the truth.
And my fun phrase version of that was, a lie can travel around the world before the truth can get his pants on. I don't know. I just like that one. Somebody came up with that. It wasn't me. But
and that's what we hear, right? In the financial industry, these things that are wrong, a lot of times they're just easy to tell in one sentence, and nobody's going to stay around long enough most of the time to hear the whole chapter of the explanation of the truth. The truth takes a lot longer to tell, and I think it comes down to your idea of agency. I think that's a critical piece. If the advisor isn't always at fault when something goes south. A lot of times it's the investor, it's the individual who didn't take enough responsibility in the conversations around what it was they were doing with their money.
Either they didn't tell the advisor some important points, or they didn't actually internalize what the advisor. Now it's on the advisor to make sure the communication is completed, right? We have this I'm not kidding you, 8-step process it's really in the Navy, but the submarine force exemplifies it, where you give an order, the person repeats it back, so you get to hear whether they heard what you said, and then they complete the action, and then they tell you, and then it's 8 steps, and it is ridiculous. I can remember being a 17-year-old, when I heard it the first time, I'm like, this is insane. How do we get anything done? But there are elements of that that are super important, right? So it's important that the advisor communicate and that they make sure that what they communicated and they get a response from the person. What do you think about that? And what did I say to you? So there's different ways to get it across, but it is important that there is shared guilt there if something goes wrong. Not guilt, but shared blame there if something does go wrong, if you don't communicate well. But you're right. Often it's the individual who changes, forgets. So having frequent meetings is super important. So all the stuff we do in our industry has a purpose, but people don't really think down as to why exactly are we doing this. A little bit more though, if you would, Todd, on the lie, like why? I don't understand. If we could crack this nut, we could save people a lot of grief. Like, why is it that the lie, is it just because it's adjusted enough and enough is omitted that it's easier to tell?
I think it's fun. I think the media twist stuff, it goes back to the old adage that statistics are lies and liars use statistics. Or Mark Twain's, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yeah, on that graduated, it's worse on the end. Yeah.
Right. And I think what I've discovered, and it goes back to that whole idea of a whole chapter, what the media has figured out is that people won't read the article all the way to the bottom. Yeah. And so now they've gotten even more bold where they'll actually put the actual facts at the end of the article that discredit the whole article, but they know nobody's going to read all the way to the bottom. And so they can say, put it in there. And one of the old, Kim doesn't like this example, but it kind of stuck out. I remember reading in the paper, Houston was going through some big growth. They were having a lot of bad stuff. And this was 30 years ago. They were having a lot of bad stuff happen in Houston with murders and different things, right? And then all of a sudden this article comes out and it said the crime rate in Houston is dropping. It's at a record low. Murder rate's down, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wait a second, that's not possible. And so I start looking through the article and what it is. So Ben Taub Hospital, which is one of the greatest ER hospitals in the country, they used to have a saying, if they came in with a heartbeat at all, they would save them. That was the deal. What happened was technology pushed medical advancement forward. So the number of murders committed, attempted murders, was still rising. It's just that Ben Taub was saving them, and so people weren't dying. So the overall murder rate was lower, but statistically, the crime rate was still going up.
Oh my gosh.
See what I'm
So they
saying?
didn't lie. They just misled their pants off.
But how do
Wow.
you know that unless you read the whole thing? And that's what happens. It's easy just to throw that one liner out there, just buy into that, and you could even have statistics that support it. A lot of times it's we interviewed two people and that's what they said, so that means that's the curve, that's the way things are going, instead of having a large enough field of survey questions or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
so we see that manipulation a lot of times, lie side, but what does it take to explain the truth? Are people going to
Yeah.
hang around that long?
And that's why I love the positive aspects of AI. There are some negative things. The server farms are going to drain all the energy. Yeah, maybe. I'm not a scarcity minded person. Maybe they're going to put us all out of work. I doubt it. That's never happened yet. But the positive side is that you can just say, is there any truth in this statement? Okay, is that the whole statement? Is there any counter arguments to that? You can just ask these amazing questions. And it comes up with, I used to have this, sorry, to the guys who built the company, there's a, I don't remember the name. I probably shouldn't say it anyway. It's Short Books or Short something or other like that. And I have a subscription to it. And it would condense down so that I could use the concepts of these books in my podcast, right? Because I didn't have time to read all the books that I wanted to talk about, people who had authors who had talked on this topic. And so now, though, I was just getting ready for a podcast, Todd. It's coming up here shortly. And I mentioned what it was to you. And I went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, ChatGPT, give me a summary of this guy's book. Now I'm thinking, I'm subscribing to this group who reads it for me. Clearly, ChatGPT doesn't have access to everything that's in his book because otherwise, how could the author make any money? It gave me a summary that was perfect for everything that I had just read in the 20% version of the book, right? And so
Nice.
it's amazing. It was fast, obviously, right? I'm telling anybody, I feel like a boomer talking about the internet here. But like I know people have tested the AI, but it's this ability to just check, is what I'm hearing, is more importantly, is what I'm saying actually in the right context? Am I misleading people or not? I think that's amazing that we're going to be able to check that pretty quickly. If you go to podcasts or news articles, there are people who are fact checking right away, immediately. It's incredible.
And I think going back to your idea, is AI going to replace us? I think if we let it, it will. But I don't think it can. It can't get rid of the human element unless we roll over and let it happen. And that's the bottom line. We have to look at the AI answers and say, wait a second, is this logical? Let's push a little. I don't think this is quite right. Let's push a little bit more. That's where we get to the difference. And that's part of what I try to do with the book is put out some real life examples. Let's think through the logic on this. Here's what the math says. Does this logically make sense? And why does it make sense? So
And you can still take the action that you want to take, but just go into it with your eyes open.
yes, that's the big difference. Go into it and make educated decisions, not just off the cuff.
Yeah. Todd, this was amazing. I think I've taken up the entire hour, and it was far better than just talking about the original topic. And we will come back and we will cover that as well. But this was amazing. Just being able to riff with you on our first ever podcast together on Gary's Gulch was amazing. I'm going to split it in two because there's so much there.
All right,
Thank
this
you,
was
my
fun.
friend.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It's good to see
All
you.
right.